Okay, we're back. So video one, you recall this is part of a series where I'm putting Trent Horn's arguments in writing so we can sort of examine them, look at them, really think about them more carefully than what you get when you just sort of hear them flying by, especially if you've sort of only heard these things for the first time or the like. So his first argument he calls the humanity argument, or a humanity argument. And the conclusion here is that abortion is prima facie wrong, typically wrong. I think this argument would allow for some exceptions. You know, what about this? What about that? Trent doesn't think abortion is absolutely wrong in every possible circumstance. So we need to keep that in mind. So why should you think that abortion's prima facie wrong? Well, because it is wrong to intentionally kill innocent biological human beings, Trent says. And the fetus is an innocent biological human being. And abortion intentionally kills a fetus, or I guess all abortions intentionally kill fetuses. So therefore, abortion is prima facie wrong. Well, I think this argument sort of sounds good initially. But ultimately, if you think about it carefully, you should conclude that all these premises are actually false. So Trent begins by thinking about premise 2, the claim that the fetus is an innocent biological human being. I believe he uses this phrase, biological human being. I often say like biologically human being. I don't know if there's a difference between biological human being versus biologically human being. But so he says premise 2 is true. And why is this? Well, he says science supports the claim that the fetus is an innocent biological human being. And I don't think science really supports that. So science supports thinking that these are human organisms or biologically human organisms. Whether they're human beings, though, depends upon sort of what you mean by human being. And at least one of those meanings isn't exactly like a scientific meaning. Or, you know, it's not scientific in a typical way. So one definition of human being, and this is kind of a definition that I used to think, oh, this is just what human beings are, and my thoughts have changed on this as a result of talking to people and thinking about it more. One definition of being a human being is just that you're a being that is human. Well, what do you mean human? Biologically human. So human beings here are beings that are biologically human. Well, what's a being? Well, to go all medieval on you, you could sort of say that beings are things that be, they have being. Which would suggest that beings are things that exist. That's too broad. So beings, I think, are probably organisms. So this idea of human beings says human beings are biologically human organisms. Well, that's true. Everybody agrees with that if they, you know, are informed about this at all. But there's another meaning of human being that I really think is sort of more common. When thoughtful people say that fetuses are not human beings, they're not denying that fetuses are biologically human organisms. They're thinking like, well, I'm a human being. What makes me a human being? And they'll say things like, you know, I got thoughts, I got feelings, I got awareness, I have relationships. That's what makes me a human being, not just being a biologically human organism. So on this definition, are embryos and beginning fetuses human beings? No, they're biologically human organisms, but they're not human beings. So how can you decide between these two definitions? Well, I think they're two legit definitions. You just need to kind of ask around and see like, well, if you deny fetuses are human beings, what do you mean? If you affirm they are, what do you mean? There's no like sort of right or wrong answer here. It's just different meanings of the word. So, but that's enough to sort of say that, well, I think premise 2 is not true. Fetuses are biologically human organisms, but they're not human beings, at least on how many people understand that term. I also want to observe that I think the word innocent doesn't really fit. That's because I think something is innocent or can be innocent sort of only if it could be guilty. So I think that means the term innocent just like doesn't apply to sort of embryos or beginning fetuses. Why is that? Well, they can't do anything. They especially like can't do anything that would be sort of good or bad that would make them sort of innocent or not. So maybe that's controversial, but that's how I think the word innocent works. So premise 1. Premise 1 says it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent biological human beings. Trent engages a question or a what about sort of based upon a misunderstanding. Somebody asks like, well, what about friendly space aliens? And the question sort of is kind of like, they think like, well, if you think that, well, what if there were like innocent space aliens? If you accept this, do you have to think it'd be okay to kill space aliens? And this is sort of just like a logical misunderstanding. It's called denying the antecedent. It's kind of like this. Suppose we had a premise that says, like, if something's a woman, then that something is wrong to kill. And somebody says, well, what about that guy? He's not a woman. Are you saying he's okay to kill? No. So basically, this is just a misunderstanding. Accepting one does not commit you to thinking it's okay to kill friendly space aliens. Meeting one sufficient condition for being wrong to kill doesn't mean you can't meet it in another way. All right, but in discussing this, Trent says that, well, these aliens would be of a rational kind or something like that, and that's why they would be wrong to kill. So, Trent considers an objection to this premise. Somebody says, like, well, if this first premise were true, if it were true that it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent biological human beings, then what about taking people off life support? Wouldn't that be wrong? And Trent's response to this is like, well, if we did that, we would be letting them die. We wouldn't be killing them. Okay, fine. One question here is like, well, what if you actively killed them? Like, why would that be wrong? What if there was somebody in a very long-term permanent vegetative state, brain dead, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah, we could let them die, but, what if there was some reason that we needed their bed sooner? Would it be, like, seriously wrong to kill them? I don't think it would be. I think a lot of people wouldn't think would think that it's not wrong to kill them. I mean, after all, they're like, well, for all practical purposes, they have been gone for a long time. Bringing about the death of their body more quickly wouldn't harm them in any sort of way. It wouldn't be disrespectful, etc. So I want to observe that I think later Trent says that human organisms like these, like in a sort of permanent vegetative state, brain dead, are persons. And I think this is sort of interesting because you might think like, well, one thing about persons is that it's wrong to let them die, or it's typically wrong to let them die. If somebody lets you die, that would probably be wrong because you are a person, wrong in most circumstances. So if you think it would be okay to let such a body die, it seems like the natural explanation is, well, you'd let the body die because the person is gone. I mean, if there were a person there, it would be wrong to let them die. So if you think they're okay to die, you're kind of denying that there's a person. Now, there is this sort of prima facie bit. You might say, like, well, this is an exceptional case, and but the general rule still applies. Well, what's the deal with the exceptional cases? It seems like the exceptional case is like, well, there's sort of they're no longer they're brain dead. Well, you could flip this around and propose, like, well, if you have human organisms that are not brain alive, then they are okay to kill or let die. So, it seems to me that Trent's response here depends upon a thinking that there's a very weighty difference, very important difference between killing and letting die. And I will observe that this is a highly controversial distinction. And you can check this out by looking up James Rachel's Active and Passive Euthanasia article. And I'll just say, I don't think there's always a big difference. Oftentimes, if it would be okay to let somebody die, sorry, somebody came in and scared me. All right, sorry about that. Interruptions. So he assumes killing and letting it die are a big difference, or there's an important difference between killing and letting die. I don't think that's always so. He also assumes that killing in these situations would be seriously wrong. And I don't think we have to think that. Again, there's nobody there. The body, the person is sort of gone from the body. Killing the body would not be wrong. All right. The final premise of the argument that Trent does not talk about is the claim that abortion intentionally kills the fetus. And I think some would say, well, not really. I mean, that's not like the intention for having an abortion. The intention of having an abortion is to end a pregnancy or to prevent parenthood, not to sort of intentionally kill a fetus. Suppose somebody had the intention to kill fetuses. I just want to kill fetuses. They could conceivably do other things other than abortion. So, yes, fetuses are killed in abortions, I think. That's true. Are they intentionally killed? Well, I think some would say no. Our intention is to end the pregnancy. Killing the fetus is sort of an unforeseen, but not quite intended side effect. So that is possible. All right. So this type of argument we discussed quite a bit in this article in Salon. So if you want to check this out more, you could do that. And let me move on to the next argument. Again, I think all these premises are false. I hope this helps.